Welcome to the next session. I would like to introduce you guys to Ms. Morgan Claybrooks and Ms. Malaysia, as they will be presenting on anti-racism and writing tutoring. If you can, wait for the end of the session to ask any questions. And when we do get to that point, please use the reaction sign at the bottom right beside share screen to raise your hand. Without further ado, I would like to present it over to Ms. Morgan and Ms. Malaysia.
Alrighty. Hi. So my name is Morgan Claybrooks. I am a mentor here at LSU. Both of us, we work in the CXC studio. We are writing mentors and we help students with their communication skills. So basically what we do is when they want to come in, they'll come in and we'll look at their essays and we will read and review and make sure that all the information that they have is correct, and they answer the questions that they want from their professor, stuff like that. We provide resources to students in case they don't understand what they're doing. So just stuff like that. So I'm going to go on and share my screen and get started with the presentation. I'm going to speak about anti-racism in tutoring. All right. So let's go. And just making sure I'm doing this properly. Okay, so in my experience as a writing mentor, I've noticed that a lot of times we suffer from standard language ideology, and that is when we use one set of rules that stem from a single dominant language. And in that case, I'm talking about standard academic English. We generally talk to students about using quote unquote proper English in their writing. And when we do this, we're kind of basically telling them like, hey, you can't write the way that you speak. In my case, I'm talking about Ebonics. Sometimes there are students who want to write in Ebonics and it just doesn't, they aren't able to, because we tell them that it's wrong and that anything that they say just comes off as incorrect. It gets denied, and it's toxic because it ignores the fact that there are a myriad of different dialects within the English language, and it contributes to the erasure of the languages as well. So, and the worst part about it is that it limits students' creativity. So, okay, let's talk about writing, that's why it's harmful. When I speak to students about using Ebonics, I talk to them about their eyes are watching God. So for example, when I was in high school, my English teacher taught us about, or how to read Their Eyes Are Watching God. And in the book, Jamie, she uses Ebonics, and it's very central to her character. And if she doesn't use it, it just doesn't sound right. So yeah, so that's kind of how I see it when we talk to our students. When they're writing their essays, it becomes inauthentic to them, because they're not being able to show their true character. And then so I advocate for them to be able to do this. And yeah, so I want them to be able to use good writing skills. But what is good writing in the first place, right? So whenever we talk about good writing, we talk about the rhetorical triangle. And in this sense, we've got our speaker, our message, and our audience. So the speaker refers to me, well, whoever's presenting, so them or me, as of right now, this is my example. So I would be the speaker, and then the message would be what I'm trying to get across. And as of what I'm trying to get across right now is, I want my students to be able to speak in a way that is authentic to them. So yeah, and my audience refers to you guys, so whoever I'm speaking to. And in this sense, I'm talking to, in this sense, when I'm talking to my students, I want them to remember who exactly they're going to present to. So audience becomes important when you want to use Ebonics, because it's like you have to code switch. And so code switching is changing the way we speak depending on our audience. Basically, we have sometimes African Americans have to code switch in order to become more palatable to the public. So I might code switch when I want to work in a corporate setting or work somewhere where I have to be quote unquote professional. And when I do talk to my students about code switching, I talk to them about if they want to do it in their writing, or so some students might want to feel more comfortable code switching when they are writing, but others may feel comfortable with code meshing. Code meshing is basically Rashawn Asante Young's version of just combining both code switching and standard academic English, or whatever is the socially acceptable language. So let's say I was going to present something like now. I would code switch or I would code mesh. That's just up to them. And then I'm going to ask you a couple questions now about whether, like, what is it like for you to code switch within the workspace?
So here at CXC, we actually don't necessarily have to code switch as much as you might in a more, in a space where it's not as acceptable to kind of be yourself. I feel as though working here, we have a lot of opportunities to just be as authentic as we can be, and we're able to just talk to people kind of how we would with a friend. And I'm not saying that as in we don't have barriers between knowing who is whose boss or who's supervisor and things like that, or we know who the mentors are, we know who our bosses are, but we are able to kind of have that professional talk where it's like, if something's going on, we can tell them. If we need help with something, we can tell them. If there's something that we see that's lacking, which isn't a lot, honestly, but there's always room for improvement with anything, we're able to tell them, hey, this is something I've noticed, or hey, a student asked us if we have this resource. I'm pretty sure we don't. Can we create that resource? So we don't necessarily have to code switch here, but I know kind of in other areas, there are times where you have to code switch. For example, just us talking to you guys alone, we're not going to be talking to you guys the same way that perhaps we would talk to each other, just because we don't actually know you guys. And we're also kind of in the group of friends here, which is different from even talking to just your professor or your parent or anything like that. So in the context of here, we have a pretty safe space, and we kind of try to have that same energy with our clients and kind of just let them know, like, when you're here, if you have nowhere else, this is a comfortable and safe space for you all to be, and none of us have any issue with addressing whatever needs arise. So we do kind of have a little bit less code switching here, but I will say that some of them, especially in their writing or even in their oral communication, because we also do that here, some of the times feel as though they're not entirely sure how they can convey what they're saying. So we try to really focus on, who are you trying to communicate this for? They're saying, well, this is an assignment for my professor. Okay, well, what is the assignment and how will you convey it to an audience that wasn't just your professor? And if it is for your professor, how do you keep your voice without making it overly professional and things like that? So we kind of just focus on really letting the mentees understand what it is that they want to talk about and how they want to talk about it, and how much code switching they actually have to do versus how much they don't have to do, and how much they can realize that they can stay authentic without completely losing their voice and sounding too professional. Like, you don't have to use the thesaurus and get a ton of words that you barely know the meaning to and use a ton of synonyms. You can say what you want to say, and we'll just help you refine it and make sure that we pinpoint exactly what it is that you want to get across.
Okay, so here we'll talk about our recommendations for people who would like to be tutors. So how can we translate code meshing, code switching into helping our students? If you notice that your student is writing in the way that they speak, just help make sure that they're expressing what they want to say effectively. And obviously, if they ask for help about something specific, just help them with that. And don't correct them if they aren't using proper grammar, just or at least ask them if that's what they intended to do in the case that they're trying to use phonics. For example, there was some discourse on Twitter about screenwriters and how they would be in a space where they would be like writing their scripts and then have their peers edit them. And whenever they got their feedback, it would always be something correcting their Ebonics, right? And it's like, no, they meant to say what they said, and the audience that they're speaking to will understand that that's what they said. So stuff like that. For the students that choose to speak in Ebonics, you can explain to them that they might be perceived differently, but it's up to them whether they want to deal with positive or negative response. And if they do really want to use Ebonics in their writing, show them examples of successful people who have written that way. So people like Toni Morrison and, again, Zorno Hurston. And then I also wanted to ask you, what are your recommendations for students that want to, speak in Ebonics or in their native dialect? Because this actually can translate to also most students that, English is not their native language.
So because of our numbers of mentors at the moment, we mainly have 1 or 2 mentors that specifically work with English as a second language students. However, we do have a few that kind of circle into the regular mentors. That is a mentor that also works with graduate students. So we don't necessarily encounter it as that much, but when we do, at least in my case, I definitely just try to show them kind of the fundamental English things that are expected of them so that they have that understanding. But then I also let them know that, what you're saying makes sense to me. And maybe it's just that we need to present it slightly better. And that just means a lot of times it might not be organized in a way that's as clear as they wanted it to be. So I kind of help them figure out, okay, this is what I want to say. Now, how do I piece this all together so that it makes sense? Because they can use their Ebonics, and then depending on the audience, their audience might not understand it. So we do have to kind of get to a point where we have that mixture of, okay, here's what the audience will know. Here's how this will affect you for your writing in terms of, going throughout the rest of your college experience and even past that, and understanding ways that you can still keep to yourself, but also acknowledge that there are other ways to speak without completely taking away from yourself. So some of the times it's just that there are those grammar issues, which we don't focus on as much because there's usually some higher order concerns, like I was mentioning, organization and making sure that we're meeting the assignment expectations in general. But to that same note, there are times where they do understand what they're doing. They just need to kind of just work around it and figure out exactly what it is they need. So I think just first, acknowledging that there is this kind of disparity between the way that you're supposed to write in terms of kind of the standard English, and then acknowledging also that the way that they speak and write is also fine, but also acknowledging the fact that for the context of a specific assignment, there might be some expectations that will limit the way that you can necessarily speak. So I think a lot of times it's just working on acknowledging all those different components, and then definitely if there's something that they're not understanding within the standard American English, kind of showing them what those things are. Like I mentioned with grammar or kind of sentence structure and things like that. Those are pretty big components that will get you to lose points in a rubric, or components that they just might not understand in general. So it's important to get them to understand those things. And then I also just work to let them know that, this is a safe space. Like, is this what you wanted to say? That's the main thing. That's my goal, is to get them to be able to convey whatever it is that they want onto the page. So I sit a lot of times brainstorming with students or kind of collaborating with them and asking them, what is it that you want to say? What do you want to say first? How do you feel like you want to say it? This is a little bit unclear to me because maybe I don't understand the kind of Ebonics or the kind of language that they're using. And I get them to explain it in a way that makes sense. And I'm like, okay, so let's see if we can find a way that keeps kind of some of the stuff you said, but add to it in a way that will make everyone be able to understand what you're saying. So it's not losing, you're not losing anything. All you can do is gain, because now you're gaining an understanding of the different language, but I'm also gaining on my end understanding of what they're trying to convey. So just overall being just very generous and patient on both ends, and just acknowledging that what they're doing isn't incorrect, and just helping them find ways to get around it and ways to get through it, and just overall feeling comfortable with their writing and just gaining that confidence that they're good writers. Because a lot of times some of them will come and saying, I'm terrible at writing. I don't know what I'm doing. I put some stuff down. I'm like, you have a lot of good content here. A lot of the times it's just figuring out exactly what it is you wanted to say in the context of the assignment. A lot of times the people that have these issues might think that, oh, they're just bad writers. And it's not that, it's just that they're more conversational with the writing in a way that's not kind of a traditional way to speak. So maybe that's something that needs to change, but that'll probably be a slow process if that ever happens. But I think just encouraging students goes a long way. Even if you're not able to get as much as you might want to get in one appointment, you can also have them come again and help them and just help them see and encourage them to kind of reach out and advocate for themselves.
All right. Are there any questions for me? So this is basically this is going to be our Q&A section. So if you guys have any questions, just go on and ask. Yep. Well, I guess we just go on and speak about more experiences at CXC if you'd like.
Okay, well, kind of, what was have you had any students where you feel as though you had to really work with them in the more conversational writing? Because I know for some of my sessions, I'll get people that tell me either they're not good writers or that their teacher says they write too conversationally, or they've noticed that they'll lose points a lot because they're not using as professional English. Kind of, how do you combat that yourself if you've had any of those sessions, or how do you do that yourself as a student?
For me, I kind of, to be honest, I teach okay, so for me, like, I feel like writing in a conversational way is helpful when you're trying to just get your point across. And then, so when I get students that are told that they speak conversationally, I try to have them look at it and then, this is what you were trying to say. So let's try and look up, I guess, some like words that'll help you, you know, like at the source. You want to look through the source and find words that'll kind of make it a little bit more, I guess, tailored to whatever they're about to write. And I kind of just describe it as like, you know, you're just gonna have to know who you're speaking to. You know, you can't just I'm not gonna say you can't do this, but it's better if you try to when we're going back to the rhetorical triangle, it's better to know who your audience is. So when you do speak conversationally, try to make sure that you know, like, this is the context within where you can do this, you know, stuff like that. That's where I could.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I know it is more difficult when the professor is saying, oh, this is too conversational. I've noticed that when they do say that, they don't provide the student examples of what they mean necessarily. So the student kind of just has their entire paper and they're like, so I speak too conversationally, I don't know what that means. And I'm like, well, I'm not even from the same background or even the same area that they're from. So I don't necessarily know exactly what the conversation is like and the colloquial speech is where they're from, but I can recognize that, you know, this does sound a little conversational, but that's because I have more of a background in the standard American English. So I'm able to identify, okay, here's probably where they're talking about this, but it seems counterintuitive to just kind of say, here's this problem, and then not explain to the student why you think it's a problem. So on my end, I don't frame it as a problem. I frame it as, okay, I think this is where your professor is saying that this is too conversational. And here's the reason why. So let's work together to kind of resolve this issue. If it entails kind of asking the professor questions, we can come up with some questions to ask the professor and kind of go, you know, this is what I wanted to say. Are you saying that I need to reframe this differently? Or is it okay if I just tailor it some? Because some of the time it might just be also the grammar. So maybe if you fixed a different issue, you don't necessarily have to change the conversationality of what you wrote. Because sometimes it's just that you didn't organize it in a way that was well enough for the person to understand. So I think a lot of times on our end, it's just kind of explaining the concepts and then having them have their own ability to decide what it is that they want to change exactly. Because we're not editing them in the sense of we're just going line by line and saying, oh no, take this out, oh that's unnecessary. Like, that's not really what we do. We can condense it. We can help them find ways to condense what they're saying so that they keep the same message while combining both their their traditional language and conversational language with the standard American English, but the goal is really just to let them know what side exists and kind of know that this is what's expected of you, but if you present it a different way, that you can still, you can still do this. And if you need to talk to a professor and tell them like, this is how I talk and this is my background. And so if you could give me more pointed advice, that would be helpful. Or if you could help me understand why this is considered conversational, I think that's a lot more helpful and more beneficial. And then I think a lot of times it's still okay to have it the way they're written. It's not unprofessional. Just framing it to them in that way and telling them, this isn't like in the context of this in the academic paper, yes, you have to write a different way, but you don't have to completely lose everything that you've already said. And then on that note, I think for my experience as a student, I kind of can empathize with them more just because I'm a student currently. So I know what it's like to kind of have to change things. And to your point, where you're saying it's good to have the conversational speech when you're first like getting all the ideas down. I think that's definitely helpful. And I think that's a lot of what happens when students come here. They just kind of write it and then they're like, okay, now what do I do? It's like, okay, well, let's sit here and go through all the things that I just discussed. So I kind of do that myself when I'm editing my own papers and I'm thinking, okay, is this what I wanted to say? And if not, how do I say it differently? Or will my professor even understand what I'm trying to say? Will the dean of whatever, because I have to do a lot of appeals, will they understand what I'm talking about? Am I able to be as authentic here as I want to be, especially with like personal statements? I think that's one of the biggest struggles for students because they're just discussing. But in those, you don't want to lose your voice. I've had experience where I had to write some and I felt like my voice wasn't in there at all because of who was editing it. But I'm the person who was getting into, for example, college, or I was the person getting into the program. So I felt like my voice was lost. And there were ways that I could have worked to, keep it authentic to myself and not just sound like over professional and just sound, for lack of a better word, in my opinion, boring. So I think just finding ways, kind of having that self-advocacy and being accountable yourself and kind of learning what the different ways to speak are, and then also acknowledging the fact that there is the way that you're expected to write, and just kind of working with yourself and other people that are equipped to help you and trained to help you will go a long way. And just being confident in what you're writing, because if you're more confident in it and you're more able to have a more defined writing style, I think that will help also kind of make sure that you're actually getting across what you want to get across, and it won't sound as unprofessional, even if it's still conversational, because you presented it so well and you're so confident in what you're saying. It doesn't really matter. They're not going to think, oh, they should have probably used this word instead of that one. If it's presented well enough, it's good. Just like if you're in a literature class and you make a point that the teacher never thought of and it seems far out there, but you have enough evidence to back it up, they're going to accept that point and be like, oh, okay, well, I didn't think about that, but that makes sense. That's kind of what it is, just making sure that you own whatever it is you're writing and have that confidence to say, well, I disagree with what you're saying, but I understand it, and being able to kind of code switch within yourself, honestly.
So I was going to ask you, how do you, so if you have a student that wants to like become more authentic, I guess like show themselves as more authentic, how would you do that in that sense? Like,
a lot of times they probably already did that when coming in. And so if they want to keep it, I just focus a lot of times anyways, because I get more I get freshmen, sophomore, juniors from all ages and demographics, but a lot of times it's more freshmen that come in here or sophomores. And so for them, they just a lot of times don't even have the backing because a lot of them graduated / went to high school in the weird COVID have school, not have school, e-learning, no e-learning, weird madness. And I was lucky enough that I graduated literally right before that. So I didn't have that issue. So a lot of times it's just teaching them fundamentals. But I think when they come in, at least for me, they already have that authentic voice there. And now they're just trying to figure out how to refine it. So if they want to keep it, I just say, I kind of break it down by paragraph and kind of say, okay, so where is kind of your thesis or your main idea sentence? Where's that? And then I go, okay, do you feel as though your paragraph support that? And then if not, tell me why. Or what were you trying to say? Okay, I was trying to say this. And I say, okay, well, I understand you're trying to see that. I see that here, but in this specific section, I'm not entirely seeing that point that you just told me you wanted to make. So how do we kind of work to make sure that this is really what you want to say? And then once we kind of get through that brainstorming and organizational and structural component, then I kind of go back in and say, okay, well, now you know what you wanted to say. Now we have it all organized. How are we going to say it? So we'll go through, if we have the time within the scope of the section, we'll go through and say, okay, let's work on redoing this sentence. And I try to do that, at least 2 of them, kind of with the mentee, so that they're able to kind of understand how they can do it. So if there's a sentence that's like really long and it's a confusing sentence, I'll tell them why I think it's confusing. Or if it's like really short and really abrupt and it's like a run-on sentence, I'll say, this is why I don't think this sentence, tell me what you wanted this sentence to do. And then I'll say, okay, I see how you wanted this to go, but this is how it's being presented to me. So let's work to maybe make the sentence longer or make the sentence shorter. Or let's say, what words did you want to use here? And if there is sometimes a case where it's just a word that isn't conveying what they wanted as well, I'll be like, okay, let's think of a different word that's a stronger word to put here specifically. Not because I want to completely change what they're doing, but because that's not as authentic as they wanted it to be. So a lot of it is asking them those questions that will get them to see, like, this is exactly what I wanted to say. Not just, oh, I thought this would sound the best here, or, oh, I think this is what my professor wanted me to do, or something. Like, no, what did you want to do in the context of this assignment? And that doesn't have to just be like a essay. Like, we'll get English essays for like rhetorical analysis and close readings and things like that, but we'll also get biology lab reports and things like that. So there are different conventions for all of those essays, but at the end of the day, they still want you to have your own style and make sure that everything's, you know, organized correctly. So just definitely just asking questions and going, okay, what exactly do you need from me, and what exactly, and then figuring out how I can give it to them. And that kind of changes with each client. And some of the times there are clients that are more anxious as well. So in those cases specifically, I just kind of ask them questions, and I ask more conversational questions. So like, maybe it's more important for that specific client to talk about their day a little bit more, or talk about how, like, literally anything. Like, if they say something and I have a thought on it, I can say, oh yeah, I saw that too. That was really crazy today. Or there's like, oh my gosh, there's some people in the union. Yeah, let's talk about that. And then let's get into, so that we can kind of segue into being more comfortable talking about the writing. Because maybe it's due tonight and they worked on it a bajillion times and they're scared and they don't think they're good at writing. And you're like, well, I see all the content. Let's just organize it better. You know, just being able to be kind to them and just be able to explain to them exactly what is expected and what they can do with those expectations, and think about what their expectations for themselves are as well.
Yeah, and that's all part of, I feel like that's all part of creating a safe space for the students. I feel like if we have a safe space, or if a safe space is created, it makes it easier for them to come and ask for help. Because, you know, a lot of times students don't want to come in and ask for help because they feel, you know, they're gonna get judged for something, you know, something simple, something, you know. So I think if we make it easier for them to, you know, just come in and conversate and just figure out what they want to do, they can come and ask questions. They'll be less nervous about it. So yeah, and that's kind of our entire goal here, is to make it more comfortable for students to come in and ask questions.
Yeah, and I think we do that pretty well, because I've had a lot of students that return specifically because they like the space, because it's pretty open space, and then 2, because even if they're only in a session with me, they'll still kind of know, they might not know by name everyone in here, but they'll get highs and hellos, or, oh, hey, it's nice to see you again, or just regular conversational things that make it not as awkward, especially because judging your writing or even your oral presentation or your visual thing like an infographic or presentation or something, that's hard to do. It's hard to come in and be like, okay, I need help with this, and then somebody tears it apart. We don't really do that. We're conversational and we're open, and we just help them through it. It's not more so, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to do. The only times we'll ever do that is for explaining a fundamental topic like grammar. That's the only time we'll say, here's what the rule is. Not gonna say that you always have to do these rules, because if you do it the right way, if you break them the right way, then it's fine. But this is the explanation that you need so that you'll understand kind of what your professor is telling you if you get feedback, or what your peer is telling you if you get feedback. So I think we do a really good job of having that comfortable space, even with just mentor to mentor. If there's a question we have and it's something that someone else is more skilled in than the other person, we're all open to just asking each other. If you have a question for the supervisor, or we need help even during a session or with anything, we can ask them. If there are new clients, we can go, oh, okay, I'm glad you're sitting here and asking me this. Book an appointment with me or someone else. You know, this person, I can tell you this person's really well versed in what you're talking about. They have availability. Talk to them next. Or if they're there at the time, say, hey, we have a question about this. Can you provide more insight so that that client will get the most out of their session and want to come back? And sometimes we don't see returners. A lot of times that's just the timing of life kind of gets in the way. But we do see a lot that just come back, and even people that come in for the first time, like, oh, this is a really nice space. Like, oh, I'll probably come back again because this was really a lot more helpful and more beneficial than I thought it would be. And if they started off anxious, pretty much guaranteed by the time that they leave, even if they're not there for the full 30 minutes or an hour, if that's what they booked, you know, they'll still go away feeling as though they got a lot out of the session. Or the people that come in for extra credit or something, and they're just like, oh yeah, I just came here for that. I'm like, okay, well, let's break this down and see what we could fix. And they're like, oh, I didn't even notice this, but now I see, like, that makes a lot more sense. That is exactly what I wanted. Or, oh, I see now, that will probably make this a stronger paper. Or that makes this paragraph make more sense. And that's what I wanted to say. So I think we do a good job of that, just getting them to see within their own writing things that they can fix, because you can always fix something with anything. There's always room for improvement in any aspect of life, and there's always a lot of things to learn. So I think just giving them, helping them gain that agency within themselves to go, oh, okay, here's that. Because I know when I get returners, and we'll start off reading something, even they'll come for history versus English versus science. So they'll come with various different topics, and I'll ask them, they'll ask me for help, and I'll start off like, okay, let's just read this first. And they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't need to say this. That's not what I wanted. I didn't do that correctly. Hold on. So before I even have to say anything, once I get some returners, they're able to more acknowledge, okay, here's where I messed up, or here's where I didn't say what I wanted to say, and they'll fix it. And then if they have trouble trying to figure out a way to fix something, but they know it sounds weird to them anyway, then I can help them do that too. So I think we're really, really good at providing that safe space and that comfortableness for people to come in and then be able to see in those skills. Like, they probably don't realize that they've gained all those skills by coming, but I do when I see them. Because if I see them like 6 times, I'm seeing progressively how the issues that we started with aren't really there, or they present themselves less and less, and they're more able to really be authentic. So I think just working on it and constantly kind of giving them those tools to be able to do it themselves is really what helps them the most. And I think it helps us too, because then we get to learn about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know way more about biology than I thought I ever would now.
Yeah. There was a specific example. Somebody did a paper about psilocybin, which is like a chemical in mushrooms. So like shrooms, magic shrooms. And that was on my test that next week. So learned a lot more than I thought I was gonna learn. So it's helpful on both sides, to be real. And I think they help make it a more comfortable space too, because as a mentor, you also acknowledge that it's very difficult to have someone comment on your work. So I think them being more open to it and being willing to have that conversation it's really nice. And it does definitely help us with kind of our communication skills, especially for like when we have to present like this. And when we go to classrooms for like peer reviews and things like that, it kind of helps us determine better ways that we can help people, but also how we can help ourselves later. Because if there's an issue that we saw, well, not an issue, if there's an issue with not being able to speak the way you thought, once you get back to your own papers, you're like, oh wait, I'm realizing that I didn't really say what I wanted to say either. So you get a lot from both ends, I think.
And I think it's really helpful that we're both students. We both can relate to each other. So some things that they're struggling with, I'm like, I was just doing this. Let me help you with this.
Yeah.
Because I had somebody with like a history essay, and I also had the same professor, and I was like, oh, okay, let's both look at this, and these are some things that you can incorporate into your essay, and these are some, like, just taking notes from, our lectures and stuff. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I was gonna, oh, go ahead.
sorry. And I was gonna say, to that note, we also have the opportunity to kind of have professors come in for some of our meetings and kind of get that training for those specific disciplines. Or we've had times where we kind of have like mini workshops where they just tell us their expectations for things. And then we get to tell them from the student side, oh, I get what you're saying too, but this is how the students are receiving it. Because some of those times I was in those specific classes they were talking about. So I know exactly what assignments they're talking about. I know exactly how anxious and stressed out I felt by them. I know exactly how confused I was for some of them. So we also get that basis where we're able to see from the professor side where there might be that lack of communication that makes students a little bit more confused or more stressed out. So I think that we also have that kind of safe space where we're able to talk on the professional level with professors, and just we get to kind of gain more presence with them and kind of learn how to have conversations with them and just be open and honest. And they're really receptive to feedback. And we're also receptive on our end too, where we're like, oh, okay, well, explain what this means, because I'm not in this class. I've never taken that before. So what does this mean for us? And how can we better help the students? So we have that kind of collaborative effort that really, really helps us in that way too.
Yeah. So going back to what we were talking about, I wanted to ask you about how do you respond to students that are anxious about using Ebonics in their writing?
Honestly, for one, I tell them that it's okay. Because it really is. I think a lot of times they're just concerned about whether they're saying what they need to say or if it's gonna be correct within their paper. And I think the answer is to tell them that it is correct, but there might be better ways to use it. Because I know when we're talking about audience, sometimes you might not necessarily use them depending on the audience. And that's fine, because that's just kind of life. I mean, like I said before, you're not going to speak the same way that you speak to your friends with your parents most of the time. Some of the time, depending on your parent relationship, maybe, but a lot of times, no. So that's just a normal component of life. So telling them that, I think, puts it into perspective for them so that they're able to know that, I can use this, but there are times where maybe I shouldn't. But
Right.
if they do use it, just kind of how. I think that you can use it for sure all the time. I've used them in some of my papers, and I get really good grades on my papers. Or the professor's like, oh, I really like that you said this because now I understand. Like, you can definitely use them. It's just how you use them.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you're not explaining the Ebonic enough, for example, if you're saying something in the paper, but it's just unclear in general, it's not going to work. So it'll seem like it's the Ebonic itself that's not working, but it's more so that the style and the structure that you gave is the part that's not working. It's not inherently just because you use the Ebonic. So I think just letting them know that it's fine to use this and kind of showing them, I understand why you use this. Let's think of, maybe it should go somewhere else in the paper. Maybe it's not even that it doesn't work. Maybe it's just that it doesn't work where it is, So a lot of times, because I don't think a lot of times they have it throughout the entire paper, just specific parts, and it does
Right.
work. But sometimes it just needs to be moved somewhere else, or maybe it needs to be explained in a different way. So just letting them know, this is cool. I like this. I understand what you're saying, but maybe not everyone will, and maybe this is the way we can handle that. Or just letting them know, okay, I see this. Your professor said it's not professional enough. Let's think of ways that we can say this more professionally, for lack of a better word, which is just going to be reorganizing a little bit, which a lot of times needs to happen anyway. Sometimes the flow of ideas just isn't that clear. So I think doing that really helps, and just kind of being there, if they have any specific concerns, addressing them and just kind of answering any of their questions too, just so that they can gain a better understanding. But I don't think a lot of times that there's many that anxious about that. There's more so a lack of understanding because just their background in terms of like what is expected of them. So I think once we elaborate and explain exactly what's expected of them, they're more able to go, oh, okay, well, I understand this now. Now I can use them the way I thought. And if we break it down by kind of sentences and paragraphs and say like, this is how it could be used, if you so choose to change it in that way, I think that goes a long way and really helps them so that they're just able to understand what to do with it. So now it's not just like, oh my gosh, I'm confused. I use this. My teacher said it's wrong. Now it's, oh, okay. It's not necessarily that I was wrong. It's just that I need to organize this and make the flow make a little bit more sense. And so we work with that. And I think that's the easiest way, just showing them and not just telling them something, and then explaining and giving them examples and ideas helps a lot, so that by the time they're kind of done with the session, they're not anxious anymore, because I think the anxiousness is more alleviated when they just get that understanding and they know that kind of we're on the same page and we're here for them as a student and as a person in general, and understand what they're doing.
I agree with you. Yep. So again, we're here for any questions that anybody has now. So
The reaction to this.
I'm not sure. So, all right.
Yeah, looks like probably no questions.
Okay. Well, that would conclude our session.
Well, thank you guys for listening to us. And I hope you got a better understanding of kind of what we do here as students and what kind of our expectation is as writing mentors. And thank you for all the people in the chat. Yeah, I hope you guys really gained a better understanding of kind of what we do and how we try to help them. It's not just as writing mentors, we also try to help them orally explain things and find better ways to just be better communicators overall.
Last slide.
Oh, yes. Okay, there we go.
There it is.
So if you guys can please use the QR code to give out the evaluation for this session, along with the conference evaluation session.